Welcome. We are with the second lecture of the paleontological evidences. In the paleontological evidences, in earlier lecture, we discussed about some types of the fossils, and we are discussing rather the types of the fossils. We discussed the unaltered fossils, then we discussed the petrifications and compressions. Now we will discuss another type of fossils which we call as the impressions. Impressions. Now, what are impressions? The impressions, as the name suggests, these are the types of fossils in which we see that an impression or a print is marked on a hard rocky matter by the fossil. So, if the fossil even has degenerated, then there remains a mark or there remains a print on hard rocky matter, and this type of this what we call as evidence is also counted as a fossil evidence. For example, I may draw over here. This is a hard rocky matter, and in this hard rocky matter we see there's an animal which had died in the remote past. So the animal is not there, but the print of this animal, the external features of this animal can be studied from this print which has got engraved upon the this what we call as rocky matter. So impressions are the fossils, that type of fossils in which a print or an impression of an animal or any other living organism is engraved deep into the hard rocky matter. Now what we understand by studying the impressions, we can, for example, this is an animal and its external features are marked on this hard rocky matter. This is a rock, this hard rocky matter. So it is print is marked on the hard rocky matter. By that we can understand many features like the height of the animal, size of the animal, and many other features we can understand by that. So this is another type of fossil which we call as the impressions. Then we will move on another type of fossils which we call as coprolites. Coprolites. Now, what we mean by coprolites? There are some fossils of fecal matter. There are These are the fossils of fecal matter. Fecal matter of past animals. For example, the fecal matter of an animal has got what we call as deposited in the hard rocky matter or somewhere in the earth, this deep into the earth, and it had changed into a ball-like structure. It had changed into a ball-like structure, and it was covered, or it had been covered by a carbonaceous shell or something else. So what I have made over here, this is a carbonaceous shell or shell of any other incompressible material which has covered this fecal matter. So once we find such fossils, we call them as coprolites. Now what we can understand from coprolites, for example, we have found a coprolite. We examine the fecal matter, because the fecal matter is covered by some incompressible material. We see this fecal matter, we examine it, we examine its contents, and by that we understand what the earlier animals used to feed upon. So this gives us an insight into the what we call as the feeding habitus of the animals which lived on this planet in the remote past. So this is another type of the fossil. Now we will move on some we will understand some other types of the fossils. So after coprolites, there are microfossils. There's another category of fossils which we call as microfossils. The another name for these microfossils is the palaeontological. It is the palaeontological. Now, what are microfossils, or what are the palaeontological? Palaeontological are basically the fossils of microscopic structures. They are the fossils of fossils of microscopic structures like the pollen grains. So we say simply that microfossils or palaeontological, they are the fossils of microscopic size. For example, the fossils of the pollen grains. Now, what we understand by these structures, for example, we have found a fossil of pollen grains, so it is simply a palaeontofossil or it's a microfossil. By understanding the structure of the pollen grains of the plants which were present on this earth quite a long time ago, we can understand how these plants use it to reproduce, what are the reproductive strategies, and many other things we can understand by that. So this is about the microfossils. Now after that, there are incrustations. The other type of fossil is the incrustations. It is the other type of fossil you understand here is the incrustations. So what are basically incrustations? These are deposits of incompressible matter or organic materials of organisms. Means to say, for example, this is an organism, not necessarily always an animal. It can be a plant or any other animal or any other organism. Now, what is incrustation? These are deposits of incompressible material or organic materials of organisms. It means to say that some incompressible layer, this is an incompressible layer. Incompressible over here means very hard, rigid. So an incompressible layer gets deposited over this organic matter of an animal. This is the animal which contains the organic matter, or any plant which contains the organic matter. An incompressible layer gets deposited over here, over the surface of this organism, and as a result, this type of fossil gets preserved, and we call this type of fossil as the incrustation. We will discuss some remaining types of the fossils, and one important fossil which we are yet to discuss is the Costas. Now what we understand by Costas, or what are basically Costas? These are those fossils which are found by solid masses of mud or other rocky material which penetrate into the body cavities. Say again, we draw here an animal. We'll draw an animal here, its body. Say example, this animal used to live on this planet in the long ancient past. What happens when this animal got buried in the deep into the earth or into the hard rocky matter? What will happen? Its organic matter will get replaced because it has underwent death. The organic matter will be decomposed by the decomposers. Now what remain there are the bones and the cavities of the body. For example, this is the cavity. This is the cavity over here which used to contain the brain. So it's the cranial cavity over here. यहाँ पे cranial cavity है. It is the cranial cavity. Now what happens? The cavity is now empty because the organic matter has degenerated. So it's an empty cavity, and in this cavity enters the mud or rocky matter. So we need to understand over here that this is the cavity, and in this cavity there has entered mud or the rocky matter. Not necessarily only the cranial cavity, many other cavities of the body are there. When the organic matter in those cavities degenerates, it is the mud or the rocky matter which enters into these cavities. Once we see such fossils, we can what we call as recover this structure made up of mud which has entered into these cavities, and by that we can understand. For example, if we try to analyze over here that the mud has entered into the cranial cavity. Now when we understand or when we study such fossils, we will remove that very portion of the mud which has entered into the this cranial cavity. Now it would be a ball-like structure. What we will understand from that, we will understand what is the cranial size of the cranial cavity of that very animal, or any other structure or any other cavity in which the mud or rocky matter has entered. So this is about the costus. Now there are some other things we need to discuss in the paleontological evidences. They shall be dealt in a separate lecture.